Hey, good morning. This is Poe. He loves Zoom meetings. Whenever he hears that I'm on one, he comes running in and jumps up on my shoulder so he can watch everybody. Um, so he'll be moderating the questions this morning. Our board member Briana Green and I are going to be talking a little bit about the child protection system, which includes the foster care system, and about some of the improvements we would like to see in it and some of the problems with it. Briana is an alumna of foster care, and so she has a lot of thoughts based on her lived experience in that system. And she and I got connected when she reached out a couple of years ago, well, probably about 3 years ago now, because of some concerns that she had. And so we've been able to sort of talk about a lot of these things, and she expressed interest in joining our board and having some ability to have some input into the system. So we're working on that together, and I'll let Briana take over now.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Well, my name is Briana Green. I'm on the board of the VPLC, and I'm also a former foster alum. So I came, like Valerie said, to the VPLC looking for help because I had aged out of the foster care system and I didn't really know my rights or anything like that when it came down to aging out. So I didn't know about your rights of what you're entitled to after you age out of the system. So I came to the Virginia Poverty Law Center to get some information on that. And I found out that there were a lot of children who were like me in a similar situation and would need advocation for it. So that's what has brought me here. Yes.
So to start off with, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about Virginia's foster care system. Virginia has about 5,500 children in foster care at any given time. Virginia is one of the worst 3 states for children who age out of foster care. And what that means is that children who are in foster care hopefully reunite with their original birth family or get connected to relatives who can take custody of them. And if neither of those possibilities are viable for them, then hopefully they can be adopted by another family. And so the hope is that all children who are in foster care end up with a permanent connection to a family. But Virginia has one of the worst records in the country for children who age out of foster care without a permanent family. So they don't legally reunite with their families. They don't become wards of a relative, and they don't get adopted, and they just age out of foster care. Now, we did work, Virginia Poverty Law Center worked really hard a few years ago. That was actually before I came to VPLC. That was Christy, on a program called Fostering Futures. And Fostering Futures is an option that states can take, which allows them to keep children in foster care after they become young adults, so between the ages of 18 and 21. And that is a huge help for those young adults who age out of foster care because, at age 18, you're not really ready to sort of take on the world without some guidance and support and help. Most of us had that kind of guidance and support and help. And those of us who have kids who are that age know that, those kids are not ready to just be launched into the world at that age. So the Fostering Futures programs allows them to transition into adulthood by remaining, continuing to have supports and stay in foster care as they transition through that period of time. And we have some good programs. We have a program called the Great Expectation Program, which puts special coaches in all the community colleges in Virginia to help them, those students who were in foster care, to have supports while they're in college, things that parents might help them with. So that's all really great. But the fact that we have so many kids who don't end up with any family at all when they age out of foster care is still really troubling. And the fact that Virginia is sort of at the bottom is also really troubling. And one of the things that has been identified as the reason for this through both a Virginia Commission on Youth study that was done back in 2015 and a JLARC, that's the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission study that was done in 2018, is that Virginia provides really poor legal representation to parents. We don't do a really good job of supporting parents who are trying to get their children back. And Briana has some thoughts about some ways that we can do better and come up with some ways to support parents. But from the legal perspective, Virginia has one of the worst systems for legal representation in the country. And the study that the Virginia Commission on Youth did back in 2015 showed that parents' attorneys receive a payment of $120 per petition for removal. So the local department petitions to remove a child that they think is unsafe with their family. An attorney is appointed, and that attorney gets paid $120 to represent that family on that petition. And private attorneys in Virginia may charge anywhere from $250 to $400 an hour. So to get $120 shows you that those attorneys are really being paid very, very little. That basically pays for half an hour of court time. It doesn't pay for time to do things like research, investigate the case, or to file motions prior to the case, or to really delve very much into the case. And so they're basically, this is going to sound kind of harsh, but I've been calling what Virginia provides to parents a due process potted plant. And what I mean by that is that, due process is what the Constitution demands when the state is basically taking away a right that we have under the Constitution. So due process means that you have notice of what the state is about to do, what right that the state is trying to burden you and take away from you, and a meaningful opportunity to be heard about the removal of that right. And so parenting is a really important right. Due process demands that the person have notice that the state is going to take your child away and that you have an opportunity to be heard. And in the legal system, having an opportunity to be heard means that you really need an attorney to argue for you, because in the legal system, if you don't have an attorney, you are really at a disadvantage. But when you only pay an attorney $120 for something that might take several hearings, then you're not really providing meaningful legal counsel. And so that's why I call it due process potted plant. It's somebody who shows up and the state can say, well, we provided due process to this parent because we paid somebody $120 to show up in court for half an hour. And that's really not, when you're talking about something as important as a child's relationship with their parents, that's really, really not enough. And in my experience representing parents, it takes hundreds of hours of work to effectively represent a parent. And in our legal system, we have for children, we have attorneys who are called guardians ad litem, or GALs. The guardians ad litem aren't paid a whole lot, but they're paid better than the parents' attorneys. They're paid $75 per hour to be in court, and then they're paid about $50 an hour for work they do outside of court. And last year we got the law changed because a lot of guardians ad litem were not meeting with the children whose best interest they represent. So last year we changed the law a little bit so that if the guardian ad litem is able to certify that they met all the standards that they were supposed to do, including meeting with the child, that they can get paid the higher in-court rate for the time that they spend with the child. So noticing that a lot of states have this kind of problem where not great legal representation is being provided to the parents, the federal government, the Administration on Children and Families a few years ago, I think it was in 2018, decided that they were going to change one of their rules, and that was whether federal money could be spent on attorneys for parents. And previously their rule was no, it could be spent on attorneys for children, it could be spent on attorneys for departments of social services, but it could not be spent on attorneys for parents. So that rule change allows more states to do what a few states have done, and that is to provide special kinds of training and to put together what are called multidisciplinary legal representation centers for parents. And in states and cities where they have done this, they have seen remarkable improvement. So the kinds of issues that we see here in Virginia with children staying in foster care for very long periods of time and the parent never regaining custody of the child, those kinds of things are expedited. Whatever the outcome is going to be for that child, whether it's reunification, and most of the time that is what happens. The advocacy of the especially trained and supported and paid attorney enables the parent to actually regain custody of their child. But even if that's for some reason not an appropriate outcome, the child ends up in a permanent situation much faster. So the situation that we have here in Virginia, where we have this very high rate of aging out, would be greatly ameliorated by having well-trained and well-supported attorneys for parents. So since that decision came out from the feds allowing states to take advantage of federal money, I've been trying to figure out ways in which we can take advantage of that. We had a bill a couple of years ago that would have increased the amount of money a parent's attorney received if they went above and beyond the sort of base that we provide in Virginia. That bill passed substantively, so it passed the courts committees, but it did not pass the money committees of the General Assembly. Keeping in mind these legal representation centers, which is more than just an attorney getting paid slightly more, but also includes support and training. Virginia attorneys for parents are not trained in representing parents. They're not trained in some of the issues that are really important. Studies show that removing children is actually really harmful for them. And of course, we all got very upset when the Trump administration was removing children at the border. And from one of those border cases, there's a really great quote from one of the judges, which is that traumatic separation from parents creates toxic stress in children that can profoundly impact their development. Strong scientific evidence shows that toxic stress disrupts the development of brain architecture and other organ systems and increases the risk for stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into adult years. Studies have shown that children who experience such traumatic events can suffer from symptoms of anxiety and PTSD, have poor behavioral and educational outcomes, and experience higher rates of poverty and food insecurity. That's for children who are removed at the border, but children are removed from their parents every day, and the same thing happens to them. And there's starting to be some recognition of that. So again, the federal government has changed some of their rules. This happened in 2018, and Virginia will start taking advantage of that in July of this year, where more money will be put up front to prevent children from being removed from their parents, rather than the money mostly being spent. Right now, the money can only be spent once the child is removed. So it sort of puts the emphasis on removing the child so that the state can take advantage of that federal money to provide services to the family. But this will move things upstream, and the state will be able to take advantage of that federal money before the child is removed and give services to the family before the child is removed, hopefully resulting in fewer removals and more assistance for families to deal with the issues that they have. So that was a lot to absorb in a few minutes. I'm going to let Briana talk a little bit about the ideas that she has that might help parents reunify with their children.
All righty. So as we know, it's a huge issue when the child is separated from the parents, and we know the amount of stress and pressure that it puts on the child, but it also puts pressure on the parents as well. Because you have to think about it this way: you have a child, you love your child, and although some people may think, oh, well, you do this or you do that, so you may not love your child, but all in all, you love your child, and you may not make the best choices as a parent, but it doesn't take away your love. So when you're ripped away from that child, you want to be able to be put back with the child in a reasonable fashion. So with that being said, I would like to come together with both like attorneys and the parents to come together and create a system to where it makes it easier on the parents to be reunified with the child. Because a lot of times parents go into court and they're given a list of items that they need to complete before reunification with their children. And when you're thinking about it, it's like, okay, I have this list, but I'm also dealing with the worst time of my life. I don't have my children. Excuse me. I don't have my children. I've been, I don't know really where to start. I might be dealing with substances. I might be dealing with mental health issues. I could be dealing with anything under the sun. And now I'm being told, here's the list of things that I need to complete before I'm able to get my children back. And I'm thinking this isn't going to be able to happen, because if you think about it, a lot of reunifications aren't really happening because parents aren't motivated to be able to get better. So I would like to create some type of system to where the parents have representation who are not their attorneys, who actually sit down with them, give them guidance to go step by step to be able to complete each item to be heard and get their child back. So that's what I've been thinking of a lot, because personally with myself, my mom was given just a list of items, and she was dealing with my father, who's deceased. She was dealing with both of her children's being separated from her. She's also dealing with grieving. She's dealing with struggling with substances. She's dealing with a lot. And that's a lot to have on a person when they're trying to get their child back. So I would like to create a fighting chance, because at the end of the day, when I was in foster care, the main thing when the judge and my GL used to ask me, what do you want to do? I wanted to go home. I didn't care about the situation. I didn't care about anything other than being reunified with my mom, because I already had a father who was deceased. So I'm pretty sure with other children who are in the system, they don't understand what's going on. And when the time they're separated from their parent, they don't know what their parent may be struggling with. So that's why I would like to give the parents a fighting chance to be able to get their children back, because it's not fair to the child. And it's also not fair to the parent when they genuinely love someone and they may have barriers that are blocking them from being able to regain custody of their children.
And another thing that I think is really important that we're just starting to pay more attention to, and that is that children are more likely to be removed from parents of color than from white parents. And that is part of our sort of carceral system, where we have seen the disparate impacts on communities of color than we have on white families. It's a form of policing, and it's also a form of sort of cultural incompetence, where we may not understand that different communities might parent differently. And so we look at those communities and say, well, I wouldn't do this, or this is not how we do things, or standards change. As a kid, when I was in kindergarten, I walked to school by myself. Now if a child in kindergarten walks to school by themselves, the police are called. Things have really changed in our society, and we hold that against parents. So I think that Briana is exactly right. We need to do more supporting of parents and give them more support, help them navigate the system, and not just say, here are the things you need to do. You need to do this, that, and the other. These are mostly low-income parents. They're already struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Often that may be some of the precipitating reason why CPS got involved, but they're also struggling to make a living and maintain a household. Sometimes they're put in a situation where, they can do the things that CPS requires of them in order for them to get their child back, or they can work and keep a job and maintain a house. And sometimes sometimes they have to choose, and that we shouldn't be putting parents in that situation. But I know we're running out of time, and Tony's going to want us to now open up for questions.
If anybody has a question, can you raise your hand? I don't see any right now. I don't see anything in the chat either. Everybody is so shy today.
Looks like there's a couple questions now.
See him?
I jumped in. I just raised my hand, and I'm sorry, I'm in the VW waiting room, so and I don't know how to turn the television off. But anyway, I'm wondering, both Briana and Valerie, if you can think about ways that DSS can be trained differently to, prevent identifying people, parents, as needing intervention, and thinking about prevention more, if there are efforts at stake or you guys are working on those types of efforts. And I'll mute myself.
So that, what I mentioned about the federal change in federal law, that will go into effect July 1st, and that will require the money that used to be put on paying for foster care maintenance payments, that will require the state to give the families prevention services up front before removing the child. So hopefully that will result in far fewer removals. And some of those services will include things like mental health services for parents who need it, substance abuse services for parents who need it. One of the things that it pays for is what's called dyadic substance abuse treatment. And we do have some places in Virginia that provide that, not very many, but we are not taking advantage of it. So dyadic substance abuse treatment is when a parent of a young child is able to bring that child with them into an inpatient substance abuse treatment. And that is so important because the bonding and attachment between a parent and child that happens in those first years is so very important, and it really harms the child, their brain development, to separate them at that age. So it's another bad situation where we say, oh, in order to get this treatment, you need to be separated from your child, when that's harmful to the child. And we're starting to see and understand those things more. There was a study that was done in Finland a few years ago that showed that children who were separated from their parents during World War II, the effects on their brains were visible in brain scans when these people were in their 80s and 90s. So, yeah. And Catherine, you have your hand up too?
Yeah, I was intrigued by the fact that you were saying that, Virginia attorneys are not really trained in this, handling these cases. And it made me think, okay, so how do we get people, first of all, to shift their perspective? How do you make a cultural change, not just among attorneys who, this is not on their radar, but what about people who already work for foster care, programs, for instance, like here in Fairfax County? What about school social workers? What about all the people who touch children in the process, that are part of the process, who have in their minds they're doing something in the best interest of the child because they believe that they know this factual thing about separating children as being in the children's best interest? This is a huge holistic cultural change. How do you reach so many people at one time to say what you believe is wrong, first of all? And we have evidentiary proof, and we've got experience with kids who've been separated, and there's been studies that have been done, and the judicial system is starting to recognize that family preservation is really the goal. How do we reach all these people?
That is a really good question. So I'm working with a bunch of people, some in Northern Virginia and in Alexandria, not Fairfax, but hopefully Fairfax can be included, and in Southwest Virginia, to put together 2 pilot parent representation programs. And, we're hoping, especially based on Briana's wish, to include parent, non-attorney parent advocates as part of those parent representation centers. We need, in order for that to be created using those federal funds, that the Virginia Department of Social Services needs to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the entities that are putting together these programs. So we've gotten pretty far, and we had a meeting with VDSS 2 weeks ago to show, what the need is, and the structure that we've put into place, and the support that we've had from it for it in the community. So I'm really hopeful that the General Assembly will approve that in the upcoming session, and that the Department of Social Services will be willing to enter into that MOU for both of those parent representation programs. But also what's needed is for the Supreme Court to start training guardians ad litem in that information about the harm to children. And, I think that's one of the things in DC and in New York State. When the department comes before the court and says, here's the harm to the child, this is why we want to remove the child, in both of those jurisdictions, they have to show that the harm to the child outweighs the harm of removal. And that is something that the rest of the country is not doing. And that is something that we need to start training guardians ad litem in, that when they're talking about a child's best interest, they need to be looking at that as well. And we need to train parents attorneys in understanding that, as well as courts and judges. So those are training issues that yes, we're going to have to address, as well as public information campaigns to help people understand those kinds of things. So that's a really good question, Catherine. Like,
Brianna, did you have something to add to that?
I think John is raising his hand.
Okay.
we can't hear you, John. You're on mute.
You might have to press your space bar. Nope, that didn't work. There you go.
For a minute, hold it down. Hold the space bar down. There.
Yeah, hold it while you talk.
Oh, okay. That's new to me. I was wondering, what is the range of services for an after they age out? Is it primarily fiscal, like foster care benefits that went to the parents before, or is it like protective services, or just what are we talking about if we were to advocate for this? How would we, how would we describe this or characterize it?
Okay, so you're asking, like, if we were to advocate for the children, how would we characterize it?
Yes.
Okay, so if we were to advocate for the parents, we would basically just like characterize it. Personally, I would like to have non-attorneys to advocate for the parents, so that it takes kind of like the stigma out of things. Because when you're thinking about the GALs and the attorneys, they're kind
Well,
of
do they always go back to their parents? What if they're independent?
Oh, are you talking about when they age out?
Yes.
Yeah, when they age out, it's up to the child. So the child can either go out on their own or they can go with their parent. But then you also have like an independent living program. So if children are deciding to stay in the system, instead of like aging out at 18, if they're continuing with school, they're allowed to stay within the system and continue getting funding through the independent living program.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to jump in here and just follow up on what John said, because John is an advocacy guy, and this is what SALT does. It's kind of like, tell us what we're supposed to be advocating for, tell us the words to say so that people understand what we're advocating for is things like family preservation. Like,
Gotcha.
We need to come up with great messaging that kind of blows up what people think they understand about foster care or aging out of foster care. And we need to turn this and say, Virginia needs to focus on family preservation for the benefit of Virginia's children. Like, I'm a messaging person, right? So, but then we need to know, what do you go after? John is terrific about, we have a bill. This is the bill. You need to like visit your legislator, call your legislator, email your legislator. I'm thinking through a nonprofit lens. I sit on the board of a human services nonprofit. Northern Virginia is full of human services nonprofits where families in jeopardy intersect with lots of other things, as you pointed out, issues of poverty, housing, food insecurity, crisis assistance. And so how do we go to these nonprofits and say, there's this new movement in Virginia focused on family preservation. And these are the things we want you to advocate for locally, so that the families you serve are not being ripped apart, because there's this ideal in Virginia that these existing systems know what they're doing and they're doing the right thing for the right reasons. So to me, this is really important. Like, this is super important. But John is your advocacy guy. Once we get this message and we point him in the right direction, John will be on this, and it will be really powerful. So I'm very much all in on this. I want to figure out how we reach people who are not necessarily being reached right now, who may not, like you said, Virginia attorneys, if they're not being trained, if this is not on their radar, if it's not being elevated, is something of incredible importance in Virginia. then we have to figure out how to do that.
Let me interrupt before you answer that. It's after 9:30, and we just always make an announcement. If you only committed to half an hour and don't feel guilty about leaving, but we will certainly continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the phrase that I use rather than family preservation is strengthening families. So, trying to the family unit, especially in communities of color, it has a lot of stresses from the racist systems in our society. And so we need to do what we can to strengthen families that will enable them to be preserved. It will enable them to stay together. And some of the ways in which we do that are, just the survival, making sure that families don't have, if a parent has to work 3 jobs to support their family, that is a huge stressor. To raise children with everything right is stressful. To raise children when you have to struggle with, am I going to be able to feed my children tomorrow? If my child is sick, am I going to have to miss work, and am I going to get fired? Those are the kinds of things where we're not giving families what they need in order to be strong families. And we're especially failing low income families and families in communities of color. So if we can strengthen families, in Southwest Virginia, we're talking about, communities where most people are white, but the economic system that supported those communities is gone. And so those families are really struggling now. That's why we're seeing so much of the, opioid addiction problems down there, because we have basically taken away the economic structure that supported those families. So there are a lot of things that I think that we need to do, but we need to look at it from how can we strengthen our families? How can we give families what they need? And I think some of the work that actually, I don't think he's on the call, but Salam Bhatti, who is our public assistance attorney, has done to increase the amount of money that people get on TANF. The TANF amount of like $200 a month, that's not enough for a family to live on. That barely will pay for their groceries. The fact that you had to be so poor in order to get SNAP is also really, ridiculous. We should be saying, what do families need, and then figuring out how to meet that need, rather than saying, oh, you lived under these incredible stressors and you didn't come out on the other side as the super mom. Well, then we'll take away your child. I mean, that's in essence kind of what we're doing. And children like Briana have suffered from that.
I also see here in the chat where Blue Jay made a good point, where it's saying that we have resources that are available, but families really don't know how to access those resources. And that is a real big thing within the community, because you'll have time limits of, we have this resource available, this resource, and nobody will really know about them. So then the resources just kind of go at bay. And also the language barrier and cultural barriers and lack of representation within communities when dealing with these situations as well. That was from Blue Jay in the chat.
And the transportation issues in Southwest Virginia are really tough. You might be told, oh, there's a mental health services, but they're in, this little city that is, 45-minute drive from you. And if you don't have a car or the money for gas, how are you going to get there? Plus, it takes so much time to get there. So in some ways that, the pandemic has helped some families because you can access things without having to travel anywhere. But again, in Southwest Virginia, they don't have good access to the internet. So, that sort of, that's another thing, when we think about highways, we spend millions of dollars to build roads, but the information superhighway, we still make people pay for, and people can't afford it, or the infrastructure doesn't even exist.
I have somebody with their hand up. I'll ask her to unmute. Go ahead.
What is the possibility for mobilizing the foster parents to help bring about a better system for when they age out? Are they organized, and are they what's the potential for getting them to you know, to advocate or to speak up?
You know, the problem with for foster parents is that a lot of times when they speak up, the children in their care are removed from them. And foster parents have contacted me over and over to say, you know, we thought that the department wasn't doing right by the parents or not doing right by the child. And so we spoke up and then the child was removed. So the problem is that in Virginia, foster parents, even though there is a foster parent bill of rights, foster parents really don't have very much power. The department decides where the child stays. And there's not even any court oversight of that. So that's a really good question. You know, I think that there's not any network of foster parents to have sort of collective power, and individually they have very little power.
I've got somebody with their hand up. Uche, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I was raising the fact that Southwest Virginia seems to be completely disconnected from access to these resources. I mean, not just internet or transportation, but even the training and social services. I mean, me as a community member, I have been asked to support people in social services department trying to research stuff. Me as opposed to them, that they have the training, they're getting paid. So I'm talking about, at least in our town, we have a very strong grassroots movement to try to improve the life of the residents in our town, which includes after school programs. You know that it's also a big thing for families at risk that sets up a lot of children, you know, into foster care. So our problem is like, we don't know where to start. We don't know where to ask for help. I mean, some people in social services or in agencies, they're open to be retrained, but we do not have the answers either. So I think everybody's left just scratching their heads with the obvious problems, but we just don't know where to get that help. And something else I wanted to comment, as an interpreter, I've been working as an interpreter. It is very frustrating to appear in court, representing these families that are about to be separated. And I will lose my job if I say anything. And I don't even know if I say anything, where to direct these people. You know, I see families being torn apart. They can't even speak the language. And they just know their kid is being pulled away at that very moment. And I started doing this to help, but I just feel complicit. So I feel very frustrated. I see the problem, I'm trying to help, I don't know how to help, and I see many others like us. So what can we do?
I think that Tony has your email, so I can connect you after the call to the folks in Southwest Virginia who are working on this. It's I think the 30th Judicial Circuit is the circuit so it's not just one particular county. And maybe you can get involved with that effort and start reaching out to more families. It sounds like you feel really frustrated and helpless. And I totally get that. I think that we need to do more to empower people like you who see the problem to be able to help connect families to services, and that hopefully that's what that effort will help do once we get some parent advocates, both legal advocates and, as Briana points out, advocates for the parents who are not attorneys but help them navigate the other aspects of the system.
I don't have to see anybody else with their hand up. Well, thank you, Briana, and thank you, Valerie. I don't see any other questions, but it was very informative. Thank you all. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Valerie. This is great.
Thank you.